We've all read Edgar Allan Poe's The Tell-Tale Heart, and we usually walk away thinking it's a classic story about a man's chilling descent into madness. But what if we've been missing the real point? Today we're going to explore a totally different kind of horror, one that isn't just about what's going on in the narrator's mind, but about the terrifying thing his mind is desperately trying to escape.
So let's just reframe the entire story around this one question. Let's park the whole madness idea over on the side for a minute. What if the real terror here is the constant, unbearable pressure of being watched, of being judged, of being known? As you're about to see, this one little shift in perspective changes absolutely everything.
And check this out, Poe himself kind of gives the game away right here. He says the story doesn't start with the crime, it starts with a voice that is desperately trying to control how it's perceived. The murder itself is almost secondary to the narrator's overwhelming need to talk, to justify, and to, perform. And that brings us to our first big idea, this notion of the performance of sanity. I mean, think about it. The very first words of the story are a defense. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? He's already on trial in his own head before he's even told us what he did.
This comparison really gets to the heart of our narrator's problem. You see, the scholar J. Gerald Kennedy argues that for this guy, sanity isn't just a stable condition. It's not something you are. No, for him, it's a performance. It's a role he's anxiously playing for some invisible audience. And that means he has to constantly prove it, justify it, and explain it, which is the exact opposite of how a truly sane person operates.
And here's the central paradox, right? All the things he offers up as proof of his sanity, his logical planning, his perfect memory, his calm explanations, they're actually the biggest symptoms of his problem. As these scholars point out, the fact that he explains way too much and is so defensive, it all reveals this deep compulsion where reason itself just becomes a mask for a mind that's totally fracturing. And that leads us to this really interesting question. Maybe Poe isn't just showing us one man's personal collapse. Maybe he's revealing a much deeper truth, that the very act of having to constantly prove your own sanity is an exhausting, impossible job that would eventually break anyone. Okay, so if he's performing, who's the audience? Well, this obsession with performance leads us right to the trigger for the entire story, the old man's eye. The narrator says he hates it, but what if that vulture eye isn't just a symbol of evil? What if it represents something way more modern and terrifying? Constant, inescapable surveillance.
The philosopher Michel Foucault actually had a term for this. He called it the internalized gaze. It's this idea that after you've been watched for so long, the surveillance actually moves inside your own head. You don't need the camera anymore. The narrator can't escape the eye because by this point, he has become his own observer, his own constant judge.
This quote from scholar Christopher Castilla gets to the absolute core of his fear. The true horror for him isn't getting condemned for doing something wrong, it's visibility. It's the sheer terror of being completely seen, of having no secrets left, of being totally transparent to some outside force. So does he really kill the old man out of hatred, or is the murder something else entirely? A frantic, totally doomed attempt to smash the camera? He's trying to destroy the external source of that gaze, but he fails to realize that by this point, the surveillance is already coming from inside him.
Okay, so this brings us to the how, the narrator's method. He's so incredibly proud of his careful, patient, precise plan. But what if that obsession with control isn't proof of his sanity at all? What if it's actually the very core of his illness?
I mean, just look at this ritual. This isn't just a plan. It's a full-blown compulsion. Repeating the exact same steps night after night, the precise timing, that single controlled beam of light. As the theorist Peter Brooks puts it, the narrator basically becomes addicted to the delay itself. The process becomes way more important than the actual outcome.
But why this obsession with time? Why midnight exactly? Well, because by controlling every single second and every single movement, the narrator creates the illusion of control over himself. He's trying to manage his internal chaos by forcing this rigid, artificial order on the world around him.
In the end, all that careful planning it's like a drug. Following his precise method numbs him to the terror that he's feeling. It's a way to silence the noise in his own head by focusing on these quiet, predictable steps of his ritual. The precision is his anesthesia.
So, the crime is done. The plan worked perfectly. But then, of course, comes the story's most famous twist, the confession. And it's driven by this bizarre contradiction. He confesses to a crime that he feels absolutely no remorse for.
Let's just paint the picture for a second. The police are there, but they don't suspect a thing. They're just being polite, making conversation. The body is perfectly hidden. By all measures, our narrator has gotten away with it. He's in total control.
So this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If he doesn't feel guilty and he's not been caught, what on earth could possibly force him to reveal everything? Well, the answer is probably not what you think.
The reasons he confesses are this complex web of pressures all collapsing at once. It's not about morality. The silence in the room just becomes unbearable. His own Bobby betrays him, literally forcing the confession out of him. He starts policing himself for the officers. And finally, his whole perfect story of control just implodes under the weight of a sound that only he can hear.
And this quote really gets to the true driver of the confession. It's not an act of repentance. It is an act of pure, absolute exhaustion. The strain of keeping up that perfect control, of performing sanity, of policing himself, it all just becomes too much. The confession is a release. It's him finally giving up.
So let's put all these pieces together. The performance of sanity, the internalized gaze, the obsession with control, the confession that comes from exhaustion. What does it all add up to? Well, it adds up to nothing less than the birth of modern psychological horror.
Before Poe, horror was largely external. It was all about haunted castles, ghosts, monsters in the dark. As Noel Carroll points out, Poe's true genius was to completely relocate the source of terror. He took it from the outside world and locked it inside the claustrophobic, inescapable confines of the human mind. The threat isn't out there anymore. It's impossible to tell apart from your own thoughts.
And this is why his stories still get under our skin so much today. He doesn't let you just observe the madness from a nice, safe distance. No, he forces you inside the narrator's logic. You are trapped in that room with him, listening to his reasoning, feeling his paranoia. He creates this really dangerous kind of intimacy, what you might call an empathy without safety.
In a haunting quote, Poe himself suggested that the terror he writes about isn't really something he created. It was already there, inside all of us. All he did was remove the distractions, close the door to the outside world, and force us to listen to what was beating inside the room all along.